South Los Angeles don't sleep. It breathes in sirens and exhales smoke. Every block got a heartbeat, but some beat faster than others. On Crenshaw and Slauson, the streetlights flicker like they're tired of watching the same movie play out. Gunshots, police tape, mothers crying into hoodies that still smell like their sons. The palm trees stand tall, but under them, the roots been bleeding for decades. They call this place home, but to outsiders, it's a war zone dressed like a postcard. Down on Hoover Street, the night runs different. Shadows move with purpose. The orange glow from storefront lights cuts across cracked pavement marked by names and numbers. 83, R60, Neighborhood, Criminal. The city tries to erase them, but by morning the walls talk again. That's how deep this thing goes. Because what started in the 70s as a brotherhood, born from survival, turned into a battlefield nobody's been able to walk away from. The Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips on one side. Powerful, respected, known from Crenshaw to the rap charts. The 83 Hoover Criminals on the other. Fierce, independent, dropping the Crip name decades ago and never looking back. Two sets born under the same blue flag, now locked in a blood feud that outlived generations. Kids growing up with beef older than they are, memorizing enemies before they know multiplication tables. You can feel it in the air, that tension that don't show up on no tourist map. For the rest of the world, this story hit headlines when a man named Nipsey Hussle tried to turn the block into a blueprint for peace. But peace in South L.A. is fragile. It don't last longer than the news cycle. His death in 2019 shook the city, not just 'cause he was loved, but 'cause it proved how deep the wound still runs. The war never really stopped. It just changed uniforms, from alleys to internet feeds, from drive-bys to diss tracks. And in the middle of it all, families still lighting candles, still praying the next headline ain't their child's name. This ain't about fame. It's about history, policy, and pain that keeps repeating itself under street signs that never change. This is South Los Angeles. Crenshaw, Slauson, Florence, Hoover. A place where legends are born and too many die young. Tonight, we're going past the myths, through the paperwork, and into the truth behind one of the city's oldest unfinished wars, the Rollin 60s versus the 83 Hoover Criminals. This is no peace in South L.A. Everything you're about to hear is built from real reports, court filings, and public records. Every name and story mentioned in this documentary is treated with respect, and with the truth that every defendant is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Nothing here is meant to glorify crime, gangs, or violence. The goal is understanding, because without context, all you get is headlines and hashtags. What we talk about tonight comes from decades of history, some from police documents, some from community voices that lived through it. These are human stories about survival, poverty, and identity. Wrapped in colors, the world turned into symbols of danger. But behind every color is a person, a family, and a city still trying to heal. The streets of Los Angeles have been studied, policed, and televised for half a century, but few talk about the cause, only the effect. That's why this story matters, because if you don't know how it started, you'll never understand why it won't stop. This documentary breaks down facts, not fantasies. Every act of violence described here is tragic. Every arrest, every life lost. A reminder that the real war isn't between the sets, but between hope and history. This is education, not entertainment. It's the truth, told with care. South Central Los Angeles ain't just one place. It's a collection of small worlds stitched together by struggle. From Florence to Manchester, from Crenshaw to Hoover Street, every block got its own language, its own code, and its own way of surviving. The maps call it South L.A. now, but the streets never changed their name. Down here, the old slang still lives. The set, the hood, on fig, the blade. Each word carries history. By day, It looks like any other Los Angeles dream. Kids walking home from school, corner stores open, food trucks serving tacos and wings. But look closer, and you'll see how the system been starving this place for generations. The freeways that cut through the neighborhoods didn't just move cars, they moved opportunity out. Jobs left, schools crumbled, liquor stores multiplied. The city built walls out of red lines and zoning laws and called it progress. When you grow up around that, the block becomes your identity. The gang sets that rose here. Rollin 60s, Hoovers, 8 trays, neighborhoods, BPS, all of them. They started as protection, not destruction. Kids forming tribes in a city that forgot them. But as the years passed, the game shifted. The crack epidemic hit in the 80s. Money and guns flooded the neighborhoods, and the fight for respect turned into a fight for control. On the west side, Crenshaw Boulevard became both a lifeline and a front line. It's where Nipsey built the Marathon store, where black businesses fought to survive gentrification, and where murals tell the story of every loss. Drive down Slauson and you'll see faces painted on walls, brothers, cousins, friends, a visual roll call of South L.A.'s grief. Over near Hoover, the energy feels heavier. The blocks south of 79th and west of Vermont carry history soaked in tension. The Hoovers made their name there, carving their presence deep into the concrete. For outsiders, it's hard to understand how close the enemies are. Sometimes just a few minutes' walk separates life from death. But what keeps this place alive isn't the violence. It's the resilience. Churches, youth centers, barber shops, places where people still believe in second chances. The city might treat these blocks like war zones, but the people living here see something else. A home worth fighting for, even when the fight never ends. To understand this war, you gotta go back. Before the rap videos, before the indictments, before the city labeled every kid on the corner a suspect. The story starts in the late 1970s, when Los Angeles was changing fast. The Black Panthers had been dismantled, jobs were leaving the city, and the LAPD's new gang units were rolling heavy through South Central. Out of that pressure came the Crips, a brotherhood of young black men trying to create identity, protection, and power in a world that gave them none. The Rollin 60s Neighborhood Crips came up around Slauson and Crenshaw, branching out from the original West Side Crips led by Raymond Washington. The Rollin part of their name came from how they moved, deep, mobile, neighborhood to neighborhood. By the early 80s, the 60s had grown into one of the most recognized sets in the city. They were known for money, cars, and presence, but also for conflict. As the Crip world expanded, not every set saw eye to eye. Fights over respect, colors, and blocks started splitting the blue side in half. Around that same time, over on Hoover Street, another identity was forming. The Hoover Crips, once aligned with the same Crip umbrella, were carving out their space from 52nd to 112th Street. But things got complicated. In the early 80s, a string of violent clashes between Hoover sets and other Crip neighborhoods, especially the Neighborhood Crips, which included the Rollin 60s, turned bloody. What began as a misunderstanding grew into one of LA's longest-running internal wars. After enough funerals, the Hoovers made a bold move. They dropped the Crip and became the Hoover Criminals, declaring independence from any alliance. That's how deep the division ran. From that day, Crip Killer Graffiti and Hoover Orange replaced the blue unity that once tied them together. The 60s kept expanding, building ties with the Rollin 40s, 90s, and other neighborhood sets. They were large, structured, and influential. Meanwhile, the Hoovers operated like a family tree with multiple branches, 52, 59, 74, 83, 92, and 107 Hoovers, each one holding down its section with loyalty and pride. The 83 Hoover Criminals became one of the most active and feared factions, known for their discipline and street presence. Their rivalry with the 60s wasn't about a single moment. It was about decades of revenge stacking on top of revenge. By the crack era of the late 80s and 90s, both sides were making headlines. The drug trade made money easy, but peace impossible. Drive-bys replaced fistfights. Kids barely out of middle school were holding Glocks like graduation gifts. Police raids hit both sides hard, but the more they locked up, the faster the streets refilled. Gang injunctions in the 2000s tried to box them in, banning members from gathering or even being seen together. But that only made the code stronger. Loyalty became survival. Through all that chaos, the Rollin 60s started shaping culture. Their influence stretched into music, fashion, and the business world. None more powerful than through Nipsey Hussle, who wore the blue with pride but tried to turn it into progress. The Hoovers, meanwhile, built their own legacy, a symbol of resistance and rebellion against a system and even against their old allies. So when people talk about the Rollin 60s and '83 Hoovers, they're not just talking about gangs. They're talking about two ideologies born from the same pain, brothers who built different empires on opposite sides of the same broken dream. And no matter how many times the city tried to draw a line between them, blood kept crossing it. Every war got its faces, the ones who shaped it, the ones who tried to stop it, and the ones who got caught in the middle. In South L.A., the Rollin 60s and '83 Hoover story revolves around a few names that turned the block into a legacy, for better or worse. First, Nipsey Hussle, born Ermias Asghedom, the most famous product of Crenshaw and Slauson, a Rollin 60s affiliate who saw farther than most. He wasn't trying to be a gangster forever. He wanted ownership. The Marathon store, his music, his community programs, all of it was his blueprint to flip gang culture into economic power. He spoke both languages, the code of the streets and the grammar of business. But even as he tried to elevate the block, he couldn't escape its gravity. To some, he was hope. To others, he was still a target. Then there's Eric Holder Jr., known on the streets as Shitty Cuz, also tied to the Rollin 60s. His name became infamous after 2019. Reports say the argument outside the marathon started over words. Accusations of snitching, a label that can destroy reputations in gang culture. Minutes later, Nipsey was gone, and the entire world was asking how a man from the same set could pull the trigger. That moment didn't just end a life, it reopened a wound. It reminded the city that betrayal can hit closer than any rival. Big U, real name Eugene Henley, is another name tied to the 60s story. A respected OG who once led the set during its most turbulent years. After time behind bars, he flipped his experience into mentorship, community programs, and a mission to guide younger members away from the cycle. His story shows what redemption looks like in a city that rarely offers it. But even he's admitted, peace in Los Angeles is fragile. One post, one rumor. One shooting can undo months of effort. Across town, the Hoovers built their identity around loyalty and pride. Their ranks run deep, OGs who remember the Crip Alliance days, and young homies raised in the digital era, where clout moves faster than bullets. Some of their newer voices entered music too, pushing their block through raw street anthems, their lyrics part warning, part memory. They wear orange instead of blue, a color that's become both statement and defiance. Beyond the names, there's a generation of mothers, brothers, and fathers who never get mentioned. The families who kept lights on while their kids got swallowed by the system. The teachers who tried to pull them off the corners. The local preachers who marched for peace even when nobody showed up. They're part of this war, too. The invisible soldiers fighting for sanity in a neighborhood that'd been living in trauma for 40 years straight. When you break down the Rollin 60s versus '83 Hoover conflict, the characters tell a deeper truth. Nobody's born into evil. They're born into geography, into survival, into a city where one street can decide your future. And every person in this story, from Nipsey to Big U, from the young Hoover rappers to the grieving mothers, carries a piece of Los Angeles history on their back. March 31st, 2019. Sunday afternoon on Slauson and Crenshaw. The sun was bright, the air still, the city calm, until it wasn't. Nipsey Hussle stood outside his Marathon store, the same place he'd built to give back to the block that raised him. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a few friends and his brother nearby. Reports say Eric Holder pulled up minutes later wearing a white shirt, carrying the kind of energy that don't need words to announce itself. Witnesses said the two exchanged conversation, calm at first, then tense. What was said in those few seconds became the center of every theory that followed. Allegedly, Nipsey told him there were rumors about paperwork, the kind that could get a man blacklisted in the streets. It wasn't meant to humiliate, maybe just a warning. But in hood politics, pride is a live wire. Holder left angry. Minutes later, cameras caught him coming back with a gun. 3 shots rang out, then more. Nipsey fell. The city froze. A man who once called for peace shot down in front of his dream. Blood on the same concrete where he used to sell mixtapes. His brother tried to save him. Fans screamed. Chaos erupted. But deep down, everyone who knew the politics of Los Angeles felt it. This wasn't just murder. It was the spark that could light up old beefs buried under years of grief. By nightfall, Crenshaw was packed. Fans crying, rivals watching, news crews circling like vultures. Police blocked off the block as social media flooded with disbelief. The internet moved fast, naming names before courts did. Rumors turned into headlines. People whispered about whether it was jealousy, revenge, or the streets eating their own again. For the Rollin 60s, it was betrayal, one of their own allegedly killing their biggest hope. For the Hoovers, it was complicated. Many respected Nipsey, but old rivalries meant every word carried weight. Over the next few days, the city felt like it was holding its breath. LAPD scrambled to control what they feared could turn into retaliation. The funeral was massive. Thousands in the Staples Center, millions watching online. Obama sent a letter. Every hood showed up, even enemies, standing under the same sky, wondering if peace could finally mean something. But anyone who's lived in South L.A. knows peace is fragile, like glass on asphalt. After the cameras left, the whispers came back. Old heads said the killing opened wounds that hadn't healed since the 80s. Streets that once tried to unite started splitting again. Social media made it worse. Disrespect posted for likes. Songs released with coded shots. The message was clear. The war wasn't over. It had just gone digital. The Marathon store became a shrine, but also a symbol of contradiction. A success story turned crime scene. Nipsey had preached the marathon continues, but the city was asking how when the same system that failed him raised the man who killed him. That day wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reminder that in South Los Angeles, you can build everything right and still lose it to the same cycle you were trying to break. And from that day forward, the Rollin 60s versus 83 Hoover feud wasn't just street politics. It became prophecy. The war that started 40 years ago found a new generation to carry it. After Nipsey's death, Los Angeles was caught between 2 realities, the grief that united the city and the fury that split it again. For a moment, it felt like peace might be possible. Gang leaders, OGs, and activists from every side stood shoulder to shoulder at candlelight vigils. Rollin 60s members were seen talking to rivals, Hoovers included. There were meetings behind closed doors with older heads from the 8 Treys, the 74 Hoovers, even the neighborhoods, all trying to keep the streets calm. But the peace didn't hold. It never does when the pain's that deep. By summer 2019, the city started buzzing again. LAPD's 77th Division logged a rise in retaliatory shootings in South Central, some on Hoover blocks, others near Hyde Park and Slauson. It wasn't always connected directly to Nipsey's case, but it carried his shadow. Some young Rollin 60s felt disrespected online. Hoovers felt targeted by blame that wasn't theirs. The internet became a new battleground. Lives were measured in followers and threats typed out in emojis. A diss track could start a war faster than a gun. By 2020, the tension had spread across the city. Videos of fights, graffiti wars, and disrespectful tributes went viral. Certain Hoover rappers used their platforms to claim independence and reject fake peace. Neighborhood Crips fired back in lyrics. Even though many of these younger members had never met the OGs who started it all, they inherited the war like a family heirloom. The names changed, but the hatred stayed the same. Then came the pandemic. Streets went quiet for a minute, but the pressure didn't. With schools closed and work scarce, more young men found themselves back on the block, back on their phones, back in that mindset of survival through reputation. Drive-bys started picking up again through 2021. Small memorials popped up around 81st, 67th, and Western, marking lives lost to retaliation that never made the news. Each new victim kept the feud alive, an endless chain reaction no one could stop. Meanwhile, the older generation, Big U, other community leaders, former gang members, were trying to broker lasting truces. They hosted peace walks, youth events, and business programs. But peace in South L.A. comes with paranoia. Every handshake feels temporary when someone's cousin still got a name etched on a wall. Rumors of new beefs between younger subsets, like Rollin 60s YGs versus younger 83 Hoover cliques, made things unpredictable. By late 2022, the city was seeing another spike in violent crime. LAPD's gang unit blamed online beefs and long-standing Crip-on-Crip conflicts. Local podcasts and street channels started documenting the ongoing hostility, blending journalism and hood storytelling. Young artists began recording songs that mentioned the feud by name, coded, sometimes direct, spreading it to audiences far beyond Los Angeles. The world watched South Central like a TV series, but for the people living it, there was nothing entertaining about it. 2023 brought Eric Holder's murder conviction, a legal ending to Nipsey's case, but no closure for the streets. Some said justice was served. Others said it changed nothing. The Rollin 60s still mourned, and the Hoovers still stood firm in their identity. Every new generation seemed to double down on loyalty, not lessons. And that's the tragedy. No one alive today started this war, but everyone living in these neighborhoods pays the price. Kids can't cross certain avenues without risking suspicion. Teens grow up learning where they can't wear orange or blue. Social media keeps the feud alive 24/7, turning memories into memes, pain into posts. By 2024, peace efforts still flicker. Local nonprofits trying to employ at-risk youth, mentors building programs in Crenshaw High, and ex-gang members launching podcasts to tell the truth. But one look at the homicide map tells the story. The war's quieter now, not finished. The names change, the faces change, the weapons change. But the reason stays the same. Survival, respect, retaliation. The unfinished war between the Rollin 60s and the 83 Hoovers isn't just about territory anymore. It's about legacy, a generation trying to rewrite a script that was written long before they were born. And until something stronger than pride steps in, South L.A. keeps bleeding history one block at a time. When the bullets stopped making headlines, the paperwork started stacking. The LAPD, the FBI, and the ATF had been watching South L.A. for years, especially after 2019 when gang politics and rap culture started blending into one digital underworld. To the feds, this wasn't just neighborhood beef anymore. It looked like organized crime, enterprise-level activity, a network built on reputation, drugs, and intimidation, the kind of structure that fit right into a RICO file. Federal attention started tightening around the Rollin 60s Neighborhood Crips first. They were big, visible, tied to names that sold millions of records. Money flowed through studios, businesses, and sometimes, allegedly, through hands that didn't want to be seen. Detectives under the LAPD Gang and Narcotics Division began connecting dots, shell companies, cash drops, burner phones, encrypted DMs. Every text, every call, every post was a breadcrumb. And in the background, the Operation Laser program was quietly mapping anchor points, hot zones tied to violent incidents around Slauson, Hyde Park, and Western Avenue. The feds built their cases with patience. They didn't need confessions. They had data. The Hoovers, on the other hand, were being tracked through Operation Southland, a federal initiative aimed at multi-state trafficking and weapons cases. Agents traced firearms found in South Los Angeles back to suppliers across state lines. The ATF started pulling purchase records, while the DEA looked into controlled substance pipelines rumored to run through Hoover Street and nearby corridors, surveillance vans parked under bridges. Confidential informants, some former rivals, recorded conversations in cars and barbershops. The streets were talking, even when they thought they weren't. In 2021, federal prosecutors began merging smaller investigations into one narrative, linking shootings, social media posts, and coded rap lyrics as part of a broader criminal enterprise. It was the same model used in RICO cases across the country. Show that violence wasn't random, but coordinated. Prosecutors pulled Instagram lives, music videos, and text messages as evidence of pattern and structure. The younger members didn't realize that every diss track was being archived by law enforcement. They wrapped their reality, and the system turned their words into exhibits. By 2022, indictments started dropping in waves. Conspiracy, gun possession, distribution, racketeering. Some names from both sides showed up on federal dockets. A few were small players, but together they formed a picture of how street networks evolve, not as single gangs, but as ecosystems. Allegedly, some 83 Hoover members were charged under federal drug conspiracies tied to larger West Coast operations. The Rollin 60s saw their share of cases too, from shootings linked through ballistics data to wiretap evidence showing coordination across sets. It wasn't a full-scale RICO yet, but it looked like groundwork. The real power of these cases wasn't the arrests. It was the fear they created. The message was clear. If you post it, they can pull it. If you rap it, they can quote it. If you're affiliated, they can connect you. The feds had adapted to the street's new language, emojis, slang, and coded captions. Every story post became surveillance. Every free the homie hashtag became a breadcrumb. Still, even as the system tightened its grip, the deeper question remained. What does justice look like in a city where poverty breeds the same crimes the government prosecutes? For every man taken in, another stepped up. For every operation closed, a new one opened down the block. The law saw organizations. The community saw survival. Two sides watching the same movie, speaking different languages. By 2023, South Los Angeles was living under quiet tension. The Rollin 60s were trying to move legitimate through music, fashion, tech, and community work. The Hoovers were fractured but active, their names still strong from 83rd to 107th. And in between them, the feds stayed patient, still listening, still building, waiting for one case big enough to put a generation on trial. The war might have started in the streets, but the next battle was being fought in paperwork, microphones, and courtroom exhibits. Because when the hood writes its story in blood, the system answers in ink. When the sun came up over Florence Avenue, the city looked normal. Kids heading to school, buses rumbling down Crenshaw, people clocking into work. But in certain neighborhoods, the morning air was thick with the sound of doors breaking. The feds were moving. Federal warrants, sealed for months, were finally being served. Names that had floated through the streets for years were suddenly on arrest lists. Helicopters cut lazy circles in the sky, and unmarked cars boxed in intersections. For South L.A., this was the next chapter in a war that had never gone quiet. The crackdown. By 6 a.m., agents in tactical gear were kicking down doors in Hyde Park, Westmont, and along Hoover Street. The targets weren't just gang members, they were key associates, secondary players, suspected lookouts. Some were veterans of the block, others barely old enough to rent a car. Inside apartments, the raids looked the same. Laser lights, flashbangs, zip ties, mothers screaming, babies crying, grandmothers begging not to see another generation disappear into the system. The official paperwork called it an interagency operation. LAPD's Gang and Narcotics Division partnered with the FBI, ATF, and DEA. The headlines came later. Operation Southland nets dozens in South L.A. But the damage started that morning. Officers recovered guns, cash, and cell phones, each one tagged as evidence in a growing RICO puzzle. Every phone was another digital diary. Every weapon another link in a timeline the feds were piecing together. For the Rollin 60s, the sweep hit close to home. A few young members tied to violent incidents were arrested, others caught on outstanding warrants. The neighborhood buzzed with confusion. Who talked, who flipped, who got out early? In a world built on trust, paranoia spreads faster than bullets. Over on Hoover Street, similar raids played out. Apartment complexes surrounded, young men pulled from beds, neighbors peeking through blinds, whispering, "They finally got 'em." But for every arrest, the block felt no safer. Within days, murals went up for the ones taken in. Free the Homies posts flooded social media. The cycle stayed alive, one side locked up, another stepping forward. Older OGs shook their heads, knowing that mass arrests never fix the reason people bang in the first place. It's like cutting the branches off a tree that's rooted in poverty. The leaves grow back every season. The community response was split. Some said the takedowns were overdue. Tired of the gunfire, tired of losing kids to corners. Others said it was another form of occupation, the system coming in heavy but never staying to rebuild. Local activists pointed out that the same neighborhoods hit by federal raids hadn't seen fresh jobs or school funding in decades. A preacher from 81st said it best. They can arrest the shooters, but they can't arrest the hunger. In the days after, social media lit up with names and mugshots. Some claimed innocence, others stayed silent. Lawyers filed motions. Families scrambled for bail. The neighborhood adjusted again to the new normal, a few more faces missing, a few more corners quiet. But the quiet didn't mean peace, it meant waiting. Because on these blocks, when the cops leave, the rumors come back. "They hit us this time," someone says. "Next time it'll be them." The crackdown wasn't victory, it was punctuation. Another comma in a sentence that never ends. The city went back to its rhythm, the sirens fading, the helicopters gone. But in every jail cell, every living room, every candlelit vigil, the same question echoed. If this is what justice looks like, why does the pain still feel the same? The news vans showed up before the smoke cleared, cameras parked at the edge of the crime scenes. Reporters rehearsing their lines. Another major gang operation in South Los Angeles. But what the headlines couldn't capture was the silence left behind. The kind that lives in living rooms after the sirens fade. Mothers sitting on couches holding photos. Kids waking up to find their brothers gone. The community didn't need the news to tell them what happened. They'd felt this story 100 times before. Across Crenshaw, conversations broke out. Barbershops, liquor stores, corner diners. Everybody had an opinion. Some said, "They brought it on themselves." Others shook their heads, saying, "Man, they don't ever raid Beverly Hills." Truth is, the hood been caught between two kinds of fear for decades. Fear of the streets and fear of the system. When the feds hit, both feel the same. On social media, the city split in half. Local pages flooded with Free the Homies hashtags and clips from live raids. Comment sections turned into arguments, people debating guilt, loyalty, justice. A few tried to shift the focus. How many more kids we gonna lose before they fix these schools? But that kind of talk don't trend for long. The mainstream press did what it always does. Statistics, mugshots, B-roll of flashing lights. But the real story was in the faces they didn't film. Grandmothers lighting candles on porches. Young mothers trying to explain to their children why Daddy won't be home for Christmas. The streets weren't celebrating the crackdown. They were bracing for what came next. Because when you pull 50 people off a block, somebody always wants revenge and somebody else always wants to fill the void. Still, in the middle of all the noise, there were voices trying to build something better. Community activists held peace walks, pastors opened church basements for youth nights, and old heads from both sides quietly met in coffee shops to talk truce. They knew how fragile hope is in South L.A. One shooting, one diss, and it's gone. But they kept trying. Because that's what resilience looks like down here. Podcasts and street journalists started covering the story too. Not the glamorized version, but the human one. They talked about trauma, addiction, the cost of loyalty, the way federal charges turn neighborhoods into ghost towns. Some episodes went viral, proving people wanted the truth, not the Hollywood version. Even a few rappers started speaking up, calling for unity, using their platforms to push something beyond survival. Yet, beneath it all, the war kept humming, quiet but alive. You could feel it in how people looked over their shoulders when driving down certain streets, in how kids knew which routes not to walk home from school, in how murals got painted, then crossed out, then repainted. That's the rhythm of a city still healing from its own legend. By the time the cameras packed up and left, the community was still here, still breathing, still mourning, still moving. South Los Angeles been through earthquakes, riots, and raids, but it never disappears. It just changes shape. And every time the media forgets, the people remember. Because for them, this ain't breaking news. It's life. Months passed, and the headlines faded. But for South L.A., the aftermath was everywhere. In the boarded-up apartments, in the empty barbershop chairs, in the quiet spaces where laughter used to live. The federal cases dragged on in courtrooms downtown, each one reading like a script of survival gone wrong. Conspiracy, firearm possession, trafficking. Words that sound like statistics until you see the families sitting in the gallery waiting for verdicts. The war had taken sons, but now the system was taking years. The Rollin 60s Neighborhood Crips were hit hardest on the public side. The name had become bigger than the streets, tied to Nipsey Hussle, to the Marathon brand, to global eyes that didn't understand what that blue NHC meant beyond a headline. After the crackdown, many from the set tried to go legit, working construction, joining youth programs, investing in local projects. But the stigma stuck. Landlords still hesitated to rent to certain zip codes. Employers still Googled names before interviews. For some, redemption wasn't enough to rewrite reputation. The 83 Hoover Criminals, meanwhile, remained fractured but unbroken. Some older members distanced themselves, calling the younger generation reckless, too loud on social media. Others doubled down, seeing the raids as proof the system never intended to let them breathe. The Hoover name still carried weight, feared, respected, misunderstood. Yet every loss, every indictment made it harder to see what winning even looked like. Across both sides, funerals blended into court dates. Mothers formed support circles, meeting every Wednesday night in church basements to pray for sons in prison and sons still out there. Some nights, they prayed for both. Children who once wore block colors started wearing memorial T-shirts instead. Nipsey's face, their brothers' faces, the same hollow eyes staring out from cotton fabric. The murals that covered the walls told a new kind of story, not about sets or power, but about grief that never ends. The Marathon store reopened, reimagined as a museum, part business, part memory. Tourists from around the world came to see what Nipsey built, taking pictures on the same sidewalk where he was killed. But for locals, that corner still carried ghosts. You could feel it when you stood there, a mix of pride and pain, a reminder of what's possible and what's lost. The culture kept evolving. Rap music still told the stories of Crenshaw and Hoover, but with a new tone, more reflection, less bragging. Artists from both neighborhoods began to question what all the killing had done. Some used their lyrics to call for peace, others to document the reality that peace alone can't pay rent or erase trauma. By late 2024, the courts handed down sentences, decades for some, probation for others. A few flipped, trading time for testimony. The street called them snitches, but the truth was heavier. They were just tired. Tired of the cycle, tired of losing, tired of pretending the game still had rules. The next generation watched it all unfold online. The war documented in real time. Mugshots, trials, verdicts, all one scroll away. But here's the quiet truth that never makes the news. Even after all that, the raids, the trials, the losses, the hood kept living. The corner stores stayed open. The kids still shot hoops at Baldwin Hills Park. Life didn't stop, it just hardened. The war changed faces, but never really ended. It became quieter, smarter, more hidden. Less gunfire, more ghost accounts and digital beef. In the end, both sides lost more than they ever gained. Money fades, clout fades, but memories stay. And every time the sun drops behind the palms on Slauson or Hoover, another mother prays her son makes it home before the lights come on. Because in South L.A., peace still feels like a rumor that never quite makes it to the block. Every war leaves a lesson, but this one left scars first. The Rollin 60s and '83 Hoover conflict ain't just a gang story. It's a mirror held up to America's broken promises. You can see the history layered in those streets. Poverty redlined into permanence, opportunity fenced out by design. Young men taught that the only power they'd ever own was fear. And when fear becomes currency, peace becomes expensive. From the outside, people ask why it keeps happening, why the same neighborhoods keep fighting the same fights. But inside the hood, the answer's simple. Pain got inheritance. When you grow up seeing your older brother killed, your cousin locked up, your homie memorialized in spray paint before he can vote, you start thinking legacy means surviving longer than your enemies. It's not evil, it's adaptation. Survival coded into trauma. The system likes to call it crime. The streets call it politics. But truth is, it's grief looking for somewhere to land. The Hoovers in the '60s ain't born enemies. They're the product of the same neglect, the same underfunded schools, the same police pressure that treats poverty like a crime scene. You can't end a war you keep feeding. Still, even in all that darkness, there's light trying to push through. You see it in the youth mentors teaching kids to code instead of bang, in the barbers who turn their shops into safe spaces, in the music that tells the truth instead of selling a fantasy. The new generation, they different, smarter, more connected, but still fighting the same ghosts. And some of them starting to see what their OGs couldn't, that the real revolution ain't retaliation, it's education. Maybe that's what Nipsey was trying to show, that you can take street loyalty and turn it into business, ownership, pride without pain. His death was tragic, but his message outlived him. The marathon continues ain't just a slogan, it's a challenge. Keep running, even when the road got potholes and sirens. Because every indictment, every raid, every death on these blocks tells the same truth. No one wins when the hood loses itself. Every time the city buries another name, another dream gets buried with it. But as long as somebody's still out there painting murals, mentoring kids, or speaking peace, the story ain't over. So when you look at South L.A., don't just see gangs. See survivors. See architects of resilience. See what happens when people fight for identity in a place that tried to erase theirs. The unfinished war between the Rollin 60s and '83 Hoovers ain't about who's tougher. It's about how deep the wounds go, and whether anyone will finally stop the bleeding. If you made it this far, you already know. There's no winners in this war. Just mothers lighting candles, murals fading in the sun, and a city trying to heal from a story it keeps repeating. South L.A. got beauty in it, though. Not the Hollywood kind, but the kind that survives under pressure. Palm trees against sirens, hope against history. The Rollin 60s and the '83 Hoovers, two names the world learned to fear, when really they're just reflections of what happens when a community's left to police itself. What started as unity turned into division. But even now, between those blocks, people are still working. OGs mentoring, youth creating, artists painting, teachers refusing to give up. Because for every gun that goes off, somebody else is still trying to build peace out of ashes. If you listening right now, take this with you. Every block got a choice. You can let the past own you, or you can learn from it. You can rep your set, or you can rep survival. Don't let history trap you into thinking pain is culture. It's not. It's a warning. This story ain't about gangsters. It's about America. About what happens when dreams get redlined and survival becomes inheritance. But even in that struggle, the light still shows up. So keep your eyes open, stay sharp, stay safe, and never let the block think for you. This is Street Politics Report, documenting the truth, not glorifying the pain. The city don't sleep. It reloads. But maybe one day, it'll finally rest.